Number 1.
Georgina Smith was found dying in Rimmer Street, Liverpool on the night of Friday 10 February 1961 with fractured skull. She died 4 hours later. A 41-year-old peddler was tried for her murder, but the murder charge was later withdrawn. When the peddler appeared on remand at Liverpool on Thursday 2 March 1961, the Crown said that it was their view that it would be unsafe to ask for the peddler to be committed for trial. A representative for the Director of Public Prosecutions said, "Of course, inquiries will continue, and if any further evidence is found, it will be open to me to reconsider the whole matter." When he was charged, he said, "I didn't do it." Georgina Smith had lived in 176 Dryden Street, Liverpool, where she had lived alone. It was heard that she had been living alone for a number of years and that she had become accustomed to visiting public houses in the London Road area most evenings. The peddler had lived in flat 2, 79 Oxford Street, Liverpool. It was heard on the evening of 10 February 1961 that Georgina Smith had visited 2 public houses in the London Road area, leaving the last, the Central Hotel, shortly before 10 p.m. She was found shortly after 11 p.m. lying in Rimmer Street, a narrow street off Kempton Street, in an unconscious condition. She was then removed to the Royal Infirmary, and although every effort was made to save her life, she died at 3:30 a.m. on 11 February 1961. A post-mortem revealed that she had sustained a number of injuries to the face and head, as a result of which she died. The police said that inquiries were made and that a description was obtained of a man who had been seen leaving Rimmer Street shortly before Georgina Smith was found. The peddler was later seen in Islington on 15 February 1961 and taken to the Central Detective Office, where he was interviewed by the Chief Inspector and to whom he made statements. When he was charged the same morning, he said, "No, I didn't do it." However, at the Liverpool Magistrates Court on Friday 3 March 1961, the representative for the Director of Public Prosecutions said that a man had walked into a police station on 22 February 1961 and made a statement, and that following police inquiries, the Crown felt that it was unsafe to ask for the peddler to be sent for trial. After the peddler was later discharged, he said, "It has been a nightmare. Now I must try to forget. I don't blame anyone for what has happened, and I am not going to try to sue the police." At her inquest, which concluded on 16 March 1961, an open verdict is returned. The peddler had been present at the inquest along with a 41-year-old labourer that had lived at 31 Birchfield Street in Liverpool. However, the labourer declined to answer any questions. When the coroner summed up, he said, "An extraordinary state of affairs. The whole thing is most unsatisfactory. Obviously, the case against a peddler must fall to the ground in view of the labourer's statement. The peddler has always maintained that he did not do it. On the evidence, I do not see how any case can stand against the labourer at this moment. Inquiries are still going on."
Number 2.
Maureen Dutton was killed at her home at 14 Thingwall Lane on afternoon of 20 January 1961. She had given birth to a boy a few days earlier and had another 2-year-old son. She had multiple stab wounds to her chest, throat and back, including what was described as a strange grouping of 14 stab wounds to her body. Her body was found by her husband, who had worked as a research chemist for ICI in Widnes, when he came home from work at 6:10 p.m. It was said that when he had returned that he had found the house in darkness and half-eaten lunch still in the kitchen. Her husband said that he had last seen Maureen Dutton at 8 a.m. that morning, when he had taken her a cup of tea to bed. It was said that she had already been dead for several hours by the time that she was found. He found her stabbed to death in the middle of the living room. It was thought that she had been murdered in front of her 2 children, who were both also in the room. It was reported that following the murder that a policewoman stayed with the children in the possibility that during the child's talk or prattling, that some clue as to the identity of the murderer might emerge. The murder weapon, thought to have been a long narrow-bladed knife, was never found. The police raked over the garden at the back of Maureen Dutton's home, and corporation workmen probed drains in the vicinity, but without luck. However, one item of interest was found at the house, a knife sheath, which appeared to have been homemade. Pictures of it were published and an appeal made for anyone who could identify it to come forward. On the night of the murder, the police also searched tennis courts belonging to the Broad Green Residents Association at the rear of the house using torches, as well as the playing fields of the Thingwall Residential School, which was opposite the house with dogs in the glare of car headlights. It was noted that she had not been robbed or sexually assaulted, and that both of her children had been left unharmed. There was no sign of a forced entry, and no one in the area heard any screaming. The police said that they thought that a murderer had entered Maureen Dutton's home via the front door, and that they were almost definite that he must have been admitted by Maureen Dutton, and that he might have called at her house under some pretext or other. It was said that she had been planning to take her children to see the Christmas crib at Childwall Parish Church, but that she didn't, it being further noted that she might not have done so because of the dense freezing fog that had been hanging over the city for some days. The last contact that she was known to have was with her mother-in-law, who telephoned her shortly after 1 p.m. on the day of her murder, who had called to say that she could not come and babysit for her that day because of the fog. The police were looking for a fake doctor who had examined a woman at Halewood a few days after she had given birth the day before Maureen Dutton's murder, Tuesday 19 December 1961. He had called at her address, and she had let him in assuming that he was from the hospital and was part of her postnatal care. It was suggested that he might also have called on Maureen Dutton and then either been let in or forced his way in by putting a knife to her throat before murdering her. The woman in Halewood said that because she had recently just given birth that she had assumed that the visit was part of her postnatal care. However, she said that when her husband later made enquiries about the man that he was told that there had been no doctors operating in the area. The bogus doctor was described as having been between 27 and 30 years old, of Jewish appearance, closely cropped curly hair, a broad nose, wearing worn horn-rimmed glasses and a dark gray overcoat. The police said, "It is still of the utmost importance that we trace the man who visited a house at Halewood on Tuesday, December 19th, and posing as a doctor, is alleged to have indecently assaulted a woman who a few days earlier had given birth to a baby. Someone must know this man and I appeal to every citizen, do you?" They were also looking for an Irish nurse aged between 25 to 35 who had got on a 10D Corporation bus in East Prescott Road close to Thingwall Lane on the afternoon of 20 December 1961 in an agitated condition, saying that she had had to get out of Liverpool and was going to London where she would get on an aircraft. She was described as being strawberry blonde and to have been acting suspiciously and to have been babbling about having done something terrible. However, she was never traced. It was also noted that during the investigation that the police had reported that they had wanted to contact the bus conductors of any buses on the Thomas Lane and District routes who could tell them whether anyone had boarded buses between 1:30 p.m. and 6:10 p.m. on the day of the murder, who had seemed a bit strange or who had acted suspiciously. At a police conference in early January 1962, it was said that 4 Home Office pathologists and 2 Home Office scientists that had attended had been called to give their opinion on whether Maureen Dutton's murder had been a ritual killing. The police noted that the possibility of a ritual killing was only one of many lines of enquiry that the police were following. The police said, "We have got the best brains possible, and we have asked some of the most eminent pathologists and scientists to this conference to give their assistance." As part of their investigation into the possibility of her murder having been a ritual killing, it was reported that the police were visiting coffee bars and all-night cafes, looking for members of the Polynesian cult of the god Tiki. It was said that the number of followers in Merseyside was not large, and that they were mostly men of various degrees of education and society, and that no women members had been traced. However, it was also reported that it was thought that the Tiki cult had a considerable following in Liverpool. It was said that Tiki worshippers kept carved wooden images of the god in their home and wore necklaces of polished shells found in the South Seas during rituals. It was said that during the religious ceremonies men and woman worshippers would abase themselves before an 8-inch tall idol of Tiki and burn incense, and that after initiation, they had small insignia tattooed on their bodies. It was said that on the night of the full moon and during the solstice, that a blood sacrifice was demanded by the island's god, and that a high priest would plunge a dagger into the heart of an animal or bird and would smear the blood across the faces of the worshippers. It was also said that the police had sought out experts at Liverpool University in the study of the Polynesian islands and their customs and habits. It was also reported that it was believed that some members of the cult had met at record shops to listen to Polynesian music. It was also said that murder squad detectives had visited Liverpool Museum and searched the library to learn more about Tiki. It was later revealed that the police were looking to trace people that had a tattoo representing a reverse swastika on their upper left arm. A detective said, "I want to make it quite plain that although I am desirous of interviewing every person who is a member or follower of the Tiki cult, this is only one of the avenues which we are following. I cannot emphasize the importance of tracing all persons who were in Thingwall Lane, for any purpose, on the afternoon of the murder." It was said that the reversed swastika was an identification mark of members of the cult that worshipped Tikis, which were Polynesian protective spirits. Maureen Dutton had been murdered on the winter solstice, a time which it was said, in the South Seas, blood sacrifices were made to the Tiki. It was also noted that the police had been in touch with Interpol over the murder and the connection with the Tiki cult. It was said that they had asked the international organization for any background information that it had on South Sea worship of the Polynesian god Tiki, in connection with the possibility that Maureen Dutton's murder had been one of ritual or sacrifice. It was later noted that a member of the Tiki cult who had lived in Parliament Street, Liverpool and who had the reverse swastika tattooed on his arm, had been remanded in custody after being accused of stealing drugs and surgical equipment from 3 Liverpool hospitals. He was also found to have been masquerading as a doctor. However, he was later allowed bail after his case was heard, where it was noted that his tattoo connected him to the murder of Maureen Dutton. It was heard that he had been seen by a woman in Halewood who had herself been seen by a bogus doctor, which was also thought to have been one of the possibilities in Maureen Dutton's case, but he was eliminated from that matter. He was described as being a man of good character who had never been in trouble before, it being noted that the only drugs he had taken were sleeping pills, a mild sedative, and vitamin K tablets. However, it was later reported that the link with the Tiki cult was later ruled out by the police. The police had also spent some time trying to identify a young man that had been seen walking along Thingwall Lane with his hands in his pockets at 1:50 p.m. on 20 December 1961. He was described as being a good-looking youth with a ruddy complexion, wearing a black leather jacket which had been open at the front, a dark green pullover and heavy boots. It was said that he had been seen several times in the area that day. It was also said that he had been seen running very fast down Thingwall Lane and having been violently sick near the steps of Court Hay Methodist Church. It was said that as he was being sick, that he had kept his hands wedged firmly in his pockets, which a witness that saw him said they thought was peculiar. However, it was reported on Friday 29 December 1961 that the police had traced him and eliminated him from their enquiries. However, they added that they were also still trying to trace a man that had been seen wearing a dark cloth jacket and fawn cavalry twill trousers who had been seen walking towards 14 Thingwall Lane from the direction of Thingwall Hall Drive between 12:40 p.m. and 12:50 p.m. on the day of the murder. He was said to have had neatly cropped hair at the back. Another person that the police were trying to trace was a man that had been wearing spectacles, a dark overcoat and a crash helmet, and was said to have been pushing a red and white scooter with L plates along Thingwall Lane at 3:30 p.m. Another man that the police said they were interested in tracing was a man that had been walking along Thingwall Lane on the day of the murder at about 3:20 p.m. and who bumped into a woman in the fog near to the Methodist Church at the corner of Greystone Road and Court Hay. The police said that they were still interested in hearing from anyone that had been Thingwall Lane between 1 p.m. and 6 p.m., which was described as a foggy afternoon. The police later also said that they thought that someone in the Liverpool area knew or suspected the identity of the murdered and appealed for anyone who could assist them to come forward, stating that they believed that anyone withholding information was not only endangering themselves but also their family and friends, it being noted that it was thought that the killer might be mentally unstable. During the investigation, the police toured the area with a special loudspeaker van appealing for assistance in the murder investigation. It was reported on 11 January 1962 that the police were extending the area of their inquiries to cover 1 mile from Maureen Dutton's home. It was noted that almost a year later, on Sunday 9 December 1962, That Leslie Hobbs was murdered at her house at 191 Childwall Valley Road, for which a youth was later convicted, and it was thought that there might have been a connection as they were both stabbed and their houses were quite close to each other, as well as other coincidences. In the case of Leslie Hobbs, it was heard that the youth had gone to her house and knocked on the door, and that when Leslie Hobbs had answered, he had forced his way in and systematically beaten her about the head and stabbed her to death. When the youth was arrested, he said that he had gone to a random house with the intention of killing a woman. On Wednesday, 6 November 1963, it was reported that a councillor asked the Watch Committee chairman at the Liverpool City Council a question on whether or not he knew of a recent newspaper report that had stated that the police knew the name of Maureen Dutton's murderer, but that they were taking no further action as the man was detained in a criminal mental institution, to which the Watch Committee chairman said he was aware of it and asked the councillor whether or not he could vouch for it, to which he replied that he could not. In later years, it was suggested that Maureen Dutton had been murdered by a lover who had been either a window cleaner or a butcher. During the investigation into Maureen Dutton's murder, more than 50,000 people were interviewed and more than 35,000 statements taken by the police. They said that more than 100 people that had been in Thingwall Lane on the day of the murder had been interviewed by the police, although they said that they knew that there were others who they asked to also come forward. At her inquest on Friday, 4 May 1962, a verdict of murder by person or persons unknown was returned. Maureen Dutton and her husband had moved into 14 Thingwall Lane just after their marriage in April 1953. The house was described as a neat 4-bedroom semi-detached dwelling and was fronted by a 4-foot-high stone wall, tall trees and rhododendron bushes. They were described by neighbors as being a quiet and reserved young couple. Thingwall Lane itself was described as being a quiet residential district and its residents mostly professional or retired people.
Number 3.
Detectives probing the unsolved murders of two 11-year-old boys want to quiz their original suspect from 40 years ago for a second time, but they are legally not allowed. The killings of childhood friends John Greenwood and Gary Miller shocked the nation on August 16, 1980, after they were found severely beaten and dumped on a rubbish tip in Wiston. The murderer remains at large 4 decades later, but in a dramatic new twist, police are desperate to re-question John Cheeseman. Then 20, he was put on trial in 1981 for both tragedies, but was acquitted after serious criticisms were leveled at Merseyside police over how they obtained his confession. Nobody else has ever been charged over the boys' murders, which saw their badly injured bodies hidden under a mattress on the disused colliery site. Now, armed with new evidence, police are keen to arrest Mr. Cheeseman again and ask him about the killings. But due to the current double jeopardy law, officers are prohibited from doing so after that move was barred by the Director of Public Prosecutions, DPP. Detectives went to the top London lawyer last March, but it was deemed their newly compiled evidence was not compelling enough. That has frustrated senior figures within Merseyside Police, who today, in a rare move, announced they were urging for a change in the double jeopardy law. That campaign was begun by John and Gary's grieving families, who described the current legislation as ridiculous and outdated. Mr. Cheeseman, from Prescott, had learning difficulties and was said to have the mental age of a 10-year-old after an accident as a young child left him with brain damage. But there was no appropriate lawyer or guardian during his interviews, and the questioning was said to be arduously long, without a suitable amount of breaks. Both failings were glaringly exposed at court, and, subsequently, the jury took just 45 minutes to acquit him of both murders. Merseyside Police recently apologized for those blunders, and they are hopeful of another chance to quiz Mr. Cheeseman about his suspected involvement in John and Gary's brutal deaths. He is believed to still be on Merseyside. He has always denied any accusation in regards to the schoolboy's murder. Debbie Greenwood, John's sister, is leading a social media campaign and has launched an emotive online petition asking for support. She wrote, "Double jeopardy laws were introduced in England over 800 years ago. Just think how much has changed in 800 years? We even had the death penalty back then. Isn't it time we made another change? Isn't it time to scrap this ridiculous, outdated law once and for all and allow officers to requisition an acquitted person when their investigation leads to it? My brother John and his friend Gary both aged 11, were brutally attacked and left to die, bleeding and hidden under rubbish in 1980. Our families have suffered many years of pain and frustration. The double jeopardy law is still preventing us from getting the justice that we so desperately need. The boys were found on the rubbish tip by a dog walker who spotted a man with swept-back dark hair and wearing a brown jacket acting suspiciously at the site, now covered by Statmowers Park. They were taken to Whiston Hospital, but both died as a result of head injuries. After leaving John's home on Raleigh Avenue, the boys had walked across the car park of what was then the Horseshoe Pub, crossed Windy Arbor Road, and went behind Whiston Labour Club. Witnesses saw them heading towards the entrance of the rubbish tip through a hole in the fence. This was the last time they were seen alive. In 2017, Merseyside Police's cold case review team investigated the murders once more after a national newspaper journalist helped to uncover new evidence. Detectives issued 4 separate appeal points which the Echo understands remain active today. Firstly, 2 boys are thought to have been attacked a month before the killings. A witness had claimed they had seen those boys, then aged between 10 and 15, being attacked by an older man outside Whiston Health Centre. Secondly, another boy is believed to have run up a garden path in nearby Halsneyett Avenue calling for help about 2 weeks before the murders. Next, a man was seen with 3 young boys, aged between 12 and 14 years, near to the church hall on Dragon Lane, Whiston, between 6:45 p.m. and 7:20 p.m. on Saturday, August 16. 2 of the boys who were seen with the man were stood on the wall of the church hall and 1 was in the grounds of the church hall. Police want to talk with anyone who was at Halstead Junior School with the boys in 1980, or members of the 28th Street Helens, 1st Whiston, Scout Group. Finally, officers wished to speak to a boy called Duffy or Cuffy, thought to have been with the boys shortly before the murder, who owned a yellow chopper push bike. He has never been traced. It is believed the boys in each alleged sighting could refer to both John and Gary. And police, who issued a public apology last May to John and Gary's families, suspect the man mentioned in the separate scenarios may be the same person. Chief Constable Andy Cook described the force's past probe as inadequate and not as thorough as it could have been. Assistant Chief Constable Ian Critchley spoke with the Echo on Friday, and he again issued an appeal for those with information to come forward and help. He said, "We have reviewed the case and undertaken further investigation. Clearly, it's so important. To lose 2 11-year-olds is tragic and traumatic, and it remains with those families and shapes their lives forever. But to not have somebody brought to justice makes it such an important case. We appeal to anyone who has new evidence that can help with our investigation to bring justice to John and Gary's family to come forward. We support the family's calls for a change in the double jeopardy law. We've met with the DPP and I respect their role in him meeting with us and the family to explain the legislation and how it is applied and interpreted. And in hearing that we believe the only way to progress is for an amendment to the current act. The dialogue is ongoing, and the families are working with us and a member of parliament in relation to seeking to petition for legislative change. Anyone with information is asked to contact investigators on 0151777 3100 or the Independent Crime Stoppers hotline on 0800 555 111.
Number 4.
When a pregnant mum died in a house fire alongside her twin toddlers, it was a tragedy that shook a Liverpool community. On April 22, 1985, Mary Budworth and her toddlers Mark and Leslie died after their Speak home on 9 Hindley Walk went up in flames. However, while it was sadly confirmed the young children died of smoke inhalation, officers discovered Mary, who was 20 weeks pregnant, had been strangled. Yet, more than 30 years on, the mum's mysterious death remains unsolved, and her daughter Tracy, who escaped the fire, still fights for justice. Tracy was only 7 years old when the fire ripped apart her home and her life as she knew it. She and 3 of her brothers managed to escape from a bedroom window with the help of firefighters, but her mum and twin brothers were killed. The events of that night are vague in Tracy's mind, however she has since suffered significant emotional and mental trauma from the horrific incident. Her mum, Mary, was in her early 30s when she died and was, Tracy said, around 20 weeks pregnant with a baby boy, a brother Tracy sadly never got to meet. Tracy said in the early hours of April 22, 1985, she was woken by the screams of her stepbrother Lee. She said the 11-year-old was running upstairs shouting fire. 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 Tracy previously told The Echo, I was awake already. I heard noises downstairs, just like rustling papers and that in the living room. They never told us what the cause of the fire was. It could have been a naked flame. She recalls that the children moved bedrooms the night of the fire and that she and her brother Dean had to climb out of a bedroom to escape the flames. She said, "We got helped out of the house by firefighters. We were taken to hospital and the neighbors took us in until the ambulance came." Tracy, who was 7, escaped along with her brother Dean, 4, Craig, 2, and stepbrother Lee, 11, but their pregnant mother Mary and toddlers Leslie and Mark died. The one question that keeps coming to the forefront of Tracy's mind is why her mum was found with strangulation marks and why no one was ever brought to justice. Notes from the investigation given by police to Tracy, whose maiden name was Tracy Budworth, were shared with The Echo for a previous report. They show extensive witness statements were taken in the weeks following the 1985 blaze, but nobody was ever found guilty of causing the deaths. The papers include statements heard at the inquest into the deaths which show a pathologist concluded Tracy's siblings had died of smoke inhalation, but that her mum, Mary Budworth, had died from shock and strangulation as well as smoke inhalation. Merseyside police told The Echo they carry out regular reviews of cold cases. A spokesman for Merseyside Police Serious Case Review Unit said, "This is a tragic case which continues to have a massive impact on Tracy and her siblings. Our investigation remains open and will continue to carry out regular reviews. I want to emphasize that no serious investigation is ever closed. If any new evidence comes to light, we take the appropriate action and try to bring some form of closure to Mary's family after all these years." One thing that remains clear is the lasting impact this tragedy had on the children who survived it and were ultimately torn apart in its aftermath. Tracy was placed in a separate foster home to some of her siblings, and she lost contact with her brothers for some time. Yet no matter how much time passes, Tracy still holds hope that someone, somewhere comes forward with the information that may finally help her in getting justice for her mother, for Leslie and for Mark. Anyone with information is asked to contact investigators on 01517773100 or the Independent Crime Stoppers hotline on 0800-555-111.
Number 5.
Detectives today arrested a man over the murder of a student battered to death 35 years ago. Ronald Carmagnole, 27, was beaten with a plank of wood as he walked home along Scotland Road in December 1987. The brutal murder sparked a huge hunt for the killer, but despite extensive investigations no one was ever convicted. A man was arrested and charged with his murder, but a month after the killing he walked free from court when the charges against him were dropped. But today Merseyside detectives arrested a 41-year-old man in Sheffield in connection with the 18-year-old murder. Mr. Carmagnole was born in Mauritius and was in the city studying applied physics at the then Liverpool Polytechnic, now John Moores University. The case was reopened in 2001 and detectives have worked on it for the past 4 years as new DNA techniques became available. Mr. Carmagnole was a talented musician, and after his murder his family traveled to Liverpool to collect a posthumous degree awarded in a ceremony at Liverpool Cathedral. Friends described the student as popular, friendly and generous, and a brass plaque was installed near the spot where he was murdered around 3 years after the killing. There have been at least 22 unsolved murders in Merseyside in the past 40 years. Previously Mr. Carmagnole's sister, Maureen Ann, had spoke out about the family's pain that her brother's killer was still at large. "It has been 16 years of pain and sadness, and no one has been caught for the murder of our brother, Roland," she said. "We believe that someone out there must know exactly who has done this horrible crime." And his brother, Jean-Claude, said, "It has been a big frustration for me, I cannot really explain it." His family were aware of today's arrest, and police say they have been kept informed as the investigation developed. "We have been watching this one for the past 4 years, and we are still not sure what the motive for this killing is," a police spokesman said. "At the moment we are still treating this as a case of mistaken identity." The raid in Sheffield was ordered after new evidence came to light following an appeal on BBC's Crime Watch programme in 2001.